So a lot of people wonder, who takes a gap year? Is it even for me? And I think that this is an interesting question because depending on your community and what gap years are seen as in your community, whether they're just widely accepted or no one does them, there still tends to be like a profile of people who, people think take gap time. And what I want to kind of really underscore through this presentation is that gap time can be really productive and useful and meaningful for every type of student. But I also want to share with you some profiles of students that I happen to see take gap time and get a lot out of it. But what's really interesting is that if depending on your type of personality and your motivations for taking gap time, what you do with your time and what you get out of it is going to be very, very different. So I think that it's helpful to understand why people take gap time, what these profiles look like, and then how that looks different in practice when people are actually taking their gap year. One of the ways that gap time is very different than going off to community college or vocational school or four-year school is that a gap year is not a one-size-fits-all process. It's a really personalized, customized period of time, and what you want to do is what matters most in the planning. So it's a kind of a reversal of the process for planning for higher education, where you're kind of given a product and you sign on for it, but it's kind of already there, laying in wait. A gap year is designed by you. So one of the types of people that I see is the worker. The worker is someone who has high test scores, high GPA, highly motivated, and high at risk for burnout. So these are students who are kind of pushing themselves all the way through their high school experience, and they're just like feeling tired by the time senior year rolls around. And they're at high risk for starting college less enthusiastic and tired and maybe even a little anxious because of their high school experience. This can be exacerbated if they go to a school that's, high energy and highly competitive. But if that student is coming from that internal motivation, it can still be a good chance to take a gap year and just have a little bit of recovery time, refresh, and pursue things that are, outside of what they normally do, or just to deepen a passion that they already have, they haven't had time to explore fully yet. The meaning seeker is someone who has high test scores, but maybe their GPA doesn't reflect those high test scores because they really need to like what they're doing in order to do well at it. So these are students who might get, an A in chemistry if they really find it interesting, and like a C or a D in English if they just don't care at all. And what a gap time allows these students to do is really explore and learn on their terms, because again, not one size fits all. So if they're interested in the sciences, they can really, really dive deep into science or astrology or, writing and photography and the arts on their gap time. And there's no rules. So they're allowed to kind of gain this perspective on their gap year, explore some new things. And then when they start college, they oftentimes have a greater perspective of why they need to do the things they need to do to get that certificate or degree. Now, the pragmatist down the lower left is someone who understands the high cost of higher education and really wants to make some deliberate choices about how and when they go to school. So a lot of times these students are going to be exploring different career paths on their gap time. They're going to be working a little bit. They're just going to be really appreciating the fact that they don't want to make the investment into higher education before more knowledge about themselves and their career path. The adventurer is someone who's probably traveled a little bit already and just like really wants to take a bite out of life, a bite out of the world, see and experience different things, different people. And they're probably going to travel internationally. They may do that in different ways, whether it's volunteering or interning or traveling. But there's many, many ways that they can experience different cultures and different languages. And that's often what their motivation is for taking gap time. Now we also have the floater. And the floater is usually someone who lacks, internal motivation. School's a struggle. They just are like having trouble activating into their adult responsibilities. And a gap year can really teach them that self-action and self-responsibility through different types of programming, getting a job, doing an internship, just having ownership over their own path and kind of growing up a little bit too in the process. Now, the soul searcher is someone who has maybe struggled, has had challenges in their high school career, such as, emotional difficulties, mental health difficulties, bullying, even people who are discovering that they're members of the LGBTQ plus community and are still kind of on that path of self-discovery. All of these types of people may just need time to work on themselves, to work on their wellness, and to feel really ready for college or whatever comes next after high school. So whether or not you saw yourself or your child in one of these profiles, you probably saw maybe a little bit of both. It's not either or. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm an adventurer and a soul searcher, and things like that. So maybe you saw a little bit of yourself in one or more of these profiles. And if so, we're going to look a little bit about what these types of people do on their gap time. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is that I can talk about how great gap time is, and I do very frequently, but what really matters is the student voices. What do they say about their gap time? And what they do say is always really amazing to me. They say things like, my gap year changed my life forever. These are quotes, by the way, from students of mine, from surveys and conversations that I've had with them. These are things that you cannot get in any other way. Gaining confidence, changing the course of your life, feeling prepared for college and adulthood, getting maturity, that takes time. And one of the things I hear over and over and over again was that a gap year was the best decision that they could have made at this moment in time. It's a really hard decision because it's still not as common as going into a post-secondary educational path, but it is something that I universally hear that no one regrets and that everyone says that their life has changed for the better because of it. That's really powerful when you're hearing it from the students themselves.